the priests, the Levites, indeed all the tribe of Levi, shall have no part nor inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings of the Lord made by fire and his portion. Therefore they shall have no inheritance among the brethren. The Lord is their inheritance, as he said to them. So they received no portion of land, but they were to be supported not by the work that they would do on the land that would be given to the Levites, but they were going to be supplied by God out of the offerings that the people brought to God. And this shall be the priest's due from the people, from those who offer a sacrifice, whether it is a bull or a sheep. They shall give to the priest the shoulder, the cheeks, and the stomach, which were the choice parts of the sacrifice. In other words, God says, these people who have been called to represent me in this way, I'm not providing for them through the cultivation of the land. I am going to provide for them out of what is given to me as an offering, and I'm going to, out of what is mine, now provide for these Levites. And these are the parts that I want to go to the Levites. The first fruits of your grain, and your new wine, and your oil, and the first of the fleece of your sheep you shall give him. For the Lord your God has chosen him out of all of your tribes to stand to minister in the name of the Lord, him and his sons forever. And if a Levite comes from any of your gates, from where he sojourns among all Israel, and comes with all the desire of his mind to the place which the Lord chooses, that he may serve in the name of the Lord his God, as all his brethren, the Levites do, who stand before the Lord, they shall have equal portion to eat besides what comes from the sale of his inheritance. So a Levite is, let's say, in the area of Capernaum, and he comes now to Jerusalem, because that is where God chooses to meet with his people as it relates to the temple under the old covenant there in the Holy of Holies. He comes there, and if he has a heart to serve the Lord there, even though he's come from another section of the land, because he is a Levite, he is to be supplied as it relates to his needs in his service to the Lord there in Jerusalem. Now, if in leaving Capernaum, he sells his inheritance, he receives an inheritance, and he sells it, and he comes to Jerusalem with some amount of wealth, he's not to be denied his provision because of his wealth or because of his inheritance. He was to be provided for from what had been given unto God. When you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire. It was a means of sacrifice among the Canaanites, where they would take their children and they would basically tumble them down into a flaming pit in the worship of Molech. And so it was a practice. Interesting. Such an immoral people. And anytime you have the level of immorality that was among the Canaanites, you're going to have unwanted pregnancies, you're going to have unwanted children, and so they just devised a means for calling it worship and the disposal of these children, and they called it sacrificing them unto God. And God said it was a terrible, terrible abomination, and the children of Israel were not to take any part in that. And you say, oh gosh, isn't that common sense? I mean, nobody would ever do that, would they? But interestingly enough, the children of Israel, as their history would unfold, some of the kings would lead the children of Israel in that practice. There shall not be found anyone among you, one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord. That doesn't matter whether they're on McHenry. Doesn't matter where they are. Doesn't matter how socially acceptable it is. And all of our broadness, God looks at it and He says, it's an abomination. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out from before you. In other words, He says, one of the reasons I'm driving these nations out of this land is because these things have begun to characterize their society. Kind of scary, isn't it? We see all the palm reading places. I hope you pray against all those things as you drive around our community. I hope every time you come down 9th Street, you pray against that adult bookstore that's down there. The bondage that is there. Praying against these things. There's a spirit involved in those things. And it's an abomination. And God warns that, hey, this is when this characterized, when this becomes acceptable within a nation, He's kind of had it up to here. Something's going to happen. It's frightening now. You know, we have the medium 900 numbers now that we can call, and you know, dial a seance and all of these kinds of things. And it's really amazing, all of the stuff that's going on. And it's dangerous because it's a very real realm. It's not pretend. The demonic realm is very, very real, and it's very, very dangerous, and it's very powerful. It's not more powerful than our God. It's not more powerful than our God who is in us, but it's very real and it's very powerful. And there's a very real war going on for the capturing of men's hearts and minds and their soul and even their strength. And Satan is very, very hard at work. It's interesting to me that as it relates to the whole demonic realm, that there's only one person, there is only one who is even strikes fear into the spirits that constitute that realm. These forces, these spirits, these demons, they only give way to the Lord. He's the only one that they really need to. But very real power there. Very, very dangerous. You never run into someone who comes out of an occultic background. Very rarely do you run into one who is either atheistic or agnostic. They're quite aware of the reality of the realm that they were involved in and quite well aware of the power of the Lord and what it is that He can do and that He alone can do. But it's dangerous when a nation begins to be characterized by these kinds of things. And now, of course, I mean, it's like somebody gave me an article several months ago as they had in Salem, Massachusetts there, they had the Ministerial Association, and they had kind of a Church of Satan there in town. And I mean, the head high priest of the church wanted to become a part of the Ministerial Association, and they voted him in because nobody could find a compelling reason to exclude him. Wow, man. Are we tolerant or what? Well, here's a compelling reason right here. It's heavy. If God's people don't know what they're doing, Satan does know what he's doing. He knows what his agenda is. We're not to have any place in any of these things. You shall be, verse 13, blameless before the Lord your God, for these nations which you will dispossess listened to soothsayers and diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not appointed such for you. We can pray and go to God. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet, Moses said, like me from your midst. From your brethren him you shall hear, according to all you desired of the Lord your God in Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, nor let me see this great fire any more, lest I die. When God gave the law to Moses in Mount Horeb, had the thunderings and the smoke and all of that going on, they spoke to Moses and said, "Ooh, boy, that God is heavy and everything. Why don't you kind of be a mediator between us and the Father, us and God?" They didn't know him as the Father, but us and God. Typically, when we look at Moses as it relates to the Old Testament, we view him as really representing the law, and he does. But in a very real sense, in the eyes of the children of Israel, he was a mediator between them and the law. And they asked Moses to take that position between them and the law, between them and the righteous standard of God as a mediator. And so he held that position in a sense. And so Moses is saying, there's a prophet who's going to come, and he's going to be like me. In what sense? He's going to be like me in that he is going to be a mediator. He's going to stand between you and the righteous requirement of the law. And when he comes, he is going to speak for God to you. So he speaks of this prophet. It is this prophet that is referred to in the New Testament when the religious leaders would come to Jesus and they would say, "Are you that prophet?" You say, "What prophet?" "This prophet." In Deuteronomy chapter 18, that's what they were referring to, because they were waiting for the prophet who would be like Moses in relationship to them in God. There were some, when they asked, Jesus said, "Who do men say that I am?" And they began to, lay things down. John the Baptist, they believe that you're Elijah. They believe that you're that prophet. And it was a reference to this prophet. And so there was an expectation concerning this prophet who was to come. The interesting thing is that Peter stands up in Acts chapter 3. And in standing up and addressing the children of Israel in his second great sermon, he identifies in verse 22 of chapter 3 to the children of Israel that Jesus is that prophet of whom Moses spoke. In other words, he is the one. You've waited for that prophet. You've waited for the fulfillment of Deuteronomy chapter 18. Jesus is the one. And the Lord said to me, "What they have spoken is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like them, like you, from among their brethren." My head is a kettle drum today, and so I'm having some troubles. "And will put my words in his mouth." That's the mark of a true prophet. "And he shall speak to them all that I commanded him." Of course, a beautiful picture of Jesus. He said only those things that the Father gave him to say. "And it shall be that whoever will not hear my words." Notice, God says, when I raise up my prophet and I speak through him, there's going to be severe consequences, not for the person who can't understand my words, but there will be severe consequences for the person who will not hear my words, give heed to my words. Everyone could understand what Jesus was saying. He talked about red skies at night, red skies in the morning. He talked about coins. He talked about dirt. He talked about all manner of things in declaring the truth of God. No matter what a person's educational background might be, anyone could understand what Jesus was saying. He was saying it directly. So it wasn't an issue of not understanding, but rebellion against the words of God being spoken by this prophet. "And it shall be that whoever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I will require it of him." This is heavy because by the Spirit of God, Peter, in that same address in Acts chapter 3, gives us insight into what God meant when he said, I will require it of the person who rejects the words that I speak through my prophet. And in verse 23 of that Acts chapter 3, as Peter is speaking, he says, and it shall come to pass that every soul who will not hear that prophet shall be utterly destroyed from among the people. It's a heavy thing to reject Jesus Christ. It's a heavy thing to reject his word and to reject the salvation that God has provided through him. And again, if it is not heavy to mankind, it is heavy to the Lord. We were at a gathering this week, and Karen and I were walking into a kitchen in a particular room. And one of the men in the kitchen, as they were talking, he was laughing, and in this macho kind of a thing, he said, I don't care all about that. I'm going to hell anyway, you know, and he laughs and everything, and, you know, his mind's filled with the idea, well, that's where the keggers are anyway, and all that kind of thing. I just never have read of any kind of a kegger party in hell, any of the scriptures or anything like that. So he does that kind of thing, and we walk into this deal, and while I'm fumbling for words to say, my wife says, you will care. I don't care, I'm going to go to hell. And so that flippancy, as it relates to these things, but it's a serious issue, a heavy thing to reject the person of Jesus Christ. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. Anyone that comes along and says they're this prophet and they speak and direct you in the worship of some other god or some other whatever that violates my word, hey, that prophet isn't of me, and that prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? In other words, when someone says something and we don't know whether it's of the Lord or not, how are we going to know that it's not of the Lord? The Lord says, when a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing doesn't happen, so you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out, or it doesn't come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously, and you shall not be afraid of him. And so the beautiful picture of the Lord towards his people and toward mankind as a whole, another way in which they would be able to recognize Messiah when he came.